And right now, here is an analysis of the current situation on the Alexandrovsk front. The enemy is becoming more aggressive here as well. On the Alexandrovsk front, Ukrainian defenders have repelled 4 enemy assault attempts. Another clash is still ongoing. The enemy tried to advance in the areas of the settlements of Ivanivka, Soznivka, Vranoe, Aristopol, and Yegorivka. Meanwhile, Russia is also on fire. From the south all the way to Bashkortostan, in Tuapse, the long-suffering port is burning vividly. Ukrainian naval drones carried out an operation there. And in Bashkiria, 4 Russian logistics facilities have been destroyed. More on this and other topics in our military review.
Everything is as usual in Russia. The night is loud and bright. Explosions thundered in Tuapse. The local port was attacked by naval drones.
Film it, look, it's burning.
The occupiers can't hide on the front either. Ukrainian border guards destroyed 5 enemy shelters along with the Russians inside. Bashkortostan and Vologda also came under attack. 4 military logistics facilities of the occupiers were destroyed at once. Ukraine's defense forces continue clearing Pokrovsk of occupiers. Russian troops have temporarily slowed the pace of their offensive in the city and its surroundings. At the same time, the invaders are blocking Ukrainian logistics in Mirnohrad, hoping to break the city's defenses, according to the Institute for the Study of War.
The occupiers are trying to take control of the logistics of Ukraine's defense forces, not only in Pokrovsk, but also accordingly in the Mirnohrad area. A sharp increase in the number of attacks. In the area of Shakov, which is a key settlement that was deoccupied by Ukraine's defense forces, control over it poses a threat to the entire Russian occupiers' incursion in the Dobropilia direction.
The intensity of fighting in Pokrovsk has decreased, but this does not mean that the Russians have abandoned their plans to occupy the city. The Ukrainian command has plans in place for various possible developments, said the commander-in-chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine.
Of the Russian occupation army. This is about 90,000 personnel.
And while the Ukrainian armed forces are fighting the occupiers, Putin is making new plans. Volodymyr Zelensky considers it quite likely that Russia could open a second front against another European country before the war in Ukraine ends.
The Russian Federation is probing for a weak link in NATO's defense system. In other words, it is casting doubt on the very nature of what is possible. The practical implementation of Article 5 of the NATO Charter on Collective Security. In addition, the Russian Federation is constantly trying to raise the level of tension, including at the borders with NATO countries, specifically Finland and Sweden.
For the past several years, Russia has been actively using elements of hybrid warfare, although Moscow traditionally denies any involvement. Against the backdrop of Russian drone incursions, Britain is strengthening Belgium's defenses. Meanwhile, in Germany, they have admitted that
at the present moment and for the time being, the current situation remains unchanged. As things stand right now, there are no immediate developments, so for now, this is how things are. At this time, they are not ready because they still need more time and preparation. They have not yet gained enough confidence or experience to move forward. Specifically designed for war in preparation and readiness. As a state. That is why it is no coincidence that Germany ranks second after the United States in terms of military technical assistance to Ukraine.
Meanwhile, in Moscow, they continue to rattle their nuclear sabers. It seems this is the Kremlin's eternal scenario. Putin's spokesman Peskov, the talking mustache, made it clear that if the US really conducts a nuclear test, Russia will be forced to respond in kind.
According to Western intelligence agencies, there is currently activity observed on the Russian side at the test site on the Pelaginova Zemlya archipelago. In other words, this is yet another escalation of so-called stakes by Putin and, accordingly, the Russian Federation. Putin understands perfectly well that the nuclear argument is the last resort that the Russian Federation can use in negotiations with the United States at the moment of ending the war in Ukraine.
In turn, Ukraine, together with its partners in the European Union, is preparing a proposal for the 20th package of sanctions against Russia, which should include additional restrictions on the Russian energy sector, the Shadow Fleet, and companies that support the aggressor's military-industrial complex.
And now we move to the Lyman direction of the front. The so-called Russian world continues to destroy, kill, and maim here as well. In the Lyman direction, the invading army carried out 2 attacks on Ukrainian positions near the settlements of Kurovy Yar and towards Lyman. One of the battles is still ongoing. And once again, there are explosions in Crimea. After the drone struck, an oil depot in Simferopol caught fire. And also, in the area of the former Donetsk airport, a storage, assembly, and launch base for Shaheds was hit by fire. Overall, the successful attacks by the Ukrainian armed forces on Russian military targets in Crimea and Donbass indicate preparations for the deoccupation of these Ukrainian regions. The evidence is in our next report.
A unique operation that lasted for months ended with a spectacular explosion in the middle of Donetsk. According to locals, nothing like this has ever been seen before in the occupied territories. Where did the strike hit? What was destroyed? And most importantly, what did the Ukrainian armed forces use?
Judging by the special effects and the massive explosions, Flamingo missiles were used.
So, let's go through everything step by step. Last night, a powerful explosion rocked Donetsk, after which, according to eyewitness videos, a fireball rose into the sky resembling a nuclear mushroom cloud, and windows were blown out in buildings several kilometers from the epicenter. Right now,
my windows have been blown out.
In fact, this is the Oktyabrski airport area. A large ammunition depot, missiles hit there. There is no official information yet, but people are already talking about an ammunition depot. I watched the video, it's spectacular. Most likely, it really was a very large missile or ammunition depot, because in the video, just like in science fiction movies or computer games, there's an explosion, and then a second explosion, and you can clearly see this glowing, rapidly expanding shockwave. So the strike on the depots in Donetsk was very successful.
a bit later, some clarity on this issue was provided by Robert Magyar-Brudi, the head of UAV systems for the Ukrainian armed forces. According to his information, the strike hit a large warehouse of Shahed-type drones, where warheads were also stored.
Targeting this complex objective became a painstaking intelligence operation lasting several months, pieced together from small fragments. Last night, Special Operations Forces and missile troops of the Ukrainian Defense Forces carried this out using appropriate strike assets.
Analysts note that despite the range of the Shahed drones, it was extremely important for the Russians to keep the warehouse for these drones close to the front line. After all, when the occupiers launch UAVs just a few dozen kilometers from the line of contact, the Ukrainian armed forces simply don't have time to respond quickly. As a result, the drones carry out their terror in frontline cities and also strike at the forward positions of our troops.
Disrupting the logistics of supplying shells and missiles for drones to the Pokrovsk direction, to Pokrovsk itself, is very important for us right now.
But there is something the defense forces under our command chose not to disclose. One thing is certain, drones definitely took part in the attack, but something else followed them as well.
As the footage from there shows, it was clearly not just drones at work. Apparently they were distracting the local air defense. But the final strike was delivered by something resembling a rocket. It could have been a drone or possibly a missile.
The fact that missiles were indeed used is also confirmed by Magyar's reports about the participation of Ukraine's missile forces in the attack.
I don't think the Shahed warehouse was unprotected, that it was just some hangars. Most likely. It was probably some kind of underground bunker. And that's another reason why I think these were flamingos. Of course, they could have used Storm Shadow as well. Storm Shadow would have worked here too. They have an anti-bunker function. Nevertheless, the scale of the detonation shows that, at least it seems to me, if you look at the first second, the explosion was clearly bigger than just a couple 100 kilograms of a Storm Shadow warhead.
So yes, most likely these were indeed our Ukrainian flamingos. By the way, this is already the third time just this week that they've inflicted colossal damage on the Russians. But in Crimea, such power wasn't needed, so drones were sent to attack the peninsula. In occupied Simferopol, around 2:30 in the morning, a fire broke out at an oil depot. It is believed to be the Krimneftezbit facility in the area of the village of Bitumnoye. There were also reports of 4 strikes in Gvardeyskoye, after which smoke rose into the sky. There, the hits likely struck the local thermal power plant, which temporarily ceased operations.
Now, let's analyze the current situation on the Konstantinovka front line. The enemy army's bloody rampage continues here as well. On the Konstantinovka front, the enemy attempted to break through our defenses 10 times in the areas of the settlements of Pleshevka, Alexandra Shultino, Rusinyar, and Sofievka. The Russian army is suffering colossal tank losses. Over 11,300 vehicles have already been destroyed since the start of the full-scale war. Moreover, manufacturers are facing global problems. A testament to this dire situation is the mass layoffs at Russia's leading Uralvagonzavod plant. Right now, we're going to tell you how Putin's tank potential has melted away.
We must not only keep pace with the global economy, but strive to outpace its dynamics by unlocking our own potential.
But in Russia, there is neither dynamism nor potential to be seen. In particular, even the most resilient are now starting to go under. For example, the Russian military giant Uralvagonzavod, which produces armored vehicles and enjoys all the privileges of the military-industrial complex, can't cope and is falling apart at the seams.
What is the plant's management doing? They don't formally fire people, but instead switch them to a 4-day work week with a 20% pay cut. Or even a 3-day work week. That means a 40% pay cut. This is exactly what's happening right now. But even that is no longer helping. And that was the stage we were at. According to the latest statistics, about 250,000 people in Russia have been working like this recently.
And now even cutting shifts to the bare minimum doesn't work anymore. Layoffs are coming at the enterprise that is the flagship of Russian tank manufacturing. This was reported by the Russian publication E1. In some departments, up to 50% of the staff are expected to be laid off, and across the entire enterprise, 1 in 10 employees will lose their job.
Previously, it was kind of like this. The civilian production might not have been very profitable, but there was a lot of money coming in from military contracts, and that somehow made up for it. But now it seems that even spending on military products is being cut, and it looks like the railcar division is relying on profits from the military sector. It can't cover the losses from the civilian sector, so now they're going to lay off people in civilian production, reportedly about 10%.
Experts explain that the reason for all this is the incredible decline of the Russian economy. Ukrainian strikes on oil refineries, which are depriving Russia of millions in petrodollars, Western sanctions, and increased pressure from the US on the Russian oil industry, have already led to a situation where even the negative forecasts for the economy are inaccurate. It will get even worse.
Let me remind you, their negative forecast from the central bank is a GDP decline of 2.5 to 3.5%, inflation at 12%, and an interest rate of 20%. In other words, they will have to raise the rate back up to 20% next year. And that's their negative scenario, which I don't even consider negative. It's just the current reality. That's the point. The thing is, the accumulated problems, they just keep popping up every day, and they prevent the central bank from maintaining the scenario it considers manageable.
The situation has escalated to the point where the economic decline in Russia has to be publicly acknowledged.
Question. Is that enough? Is this what we wanted?
In fact, even according to official data, recession has already affected 19 out of 24 sectors of the Russian economy. Moreover, they're even starting to have problems with defense industry enterprises. If these enterprises are already experiencing non-payments, not getting money from the budget, and the work week is being reduced, for example, Uralvagonzavod, this means their funding was cut, well, about 3 months ago. So these processes are actually happening.
At the same time, the funniest thing is that in Russia, they've already figured out how to present this information to the higher-ups. Everything is in the spirit of negative growth and unsuccessful successes. So now, they're openly talking about the economic decline. At the same time, they add that there was such an unprecedented boom before, it simply couldn't last forever. So now we're seeing a decline.
That's their strategy. To say, no, there's no recession, no economic downturn. Then to release a statement saying that, yes, most likely there will be an economic decline in the fourth quarter. And to accompany all of this with a bunch of disclaimers.
The obvious solution was, once again, to revise the budget draft. Naturally, in the direction of negative growth.
We are holding a whole series of meetings on the framework of the country's main financial document, its primary priority.
And as before, the priority remains the war. So analysts are not advising to expect any improvements. And if the cuts have already affected the industrial giants of the military-industrial complex, then all enterprises in the country, including private ones, are next in line.
Now, let's move to the southern Slobozhensky sector of the front. Putin's army is up to its usual tricks here as well. In the southern Slobozhansky direction, the enemy carried out 8 attacks in the areas of Volchansk, Volchanskaya Utory, and Kamenka. 2 combat clashes are still ongoing. The Ukrainian armed forces destroyed and damaged a record number of Russian oil refineries in 2025. And drivers all across Russia are feeling the effects of this more and more. And it will only get worse since the drone sanctions from the Ukrainian armed forces are only intensifying. What should the aggressors expect? You'll see now.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
The Ukrainian armed forces' attacks on Russian oil refineries are setting new records in both range and frequency.
We are striking only legitimate targets. Oil extraction and refining make up 90% of Russia's defense budget. These are dirty oil rubles with which the enemy is killing us. If we look at the statistics for September and October of this year, that's 20 targets. Among them are 6 oil refineries, 2 oil terminals, 3 oil depots, and 9 oil pumping stations.
As of early November 2025, Ukraine has carried out 111 strikes on oil depots and refineries in Russia. For comparison, throughout all of 2024, there were 94 such incidents. As a result, the Russian Federation is facing enormous problems with oil refining volumes, as well as shortages of fuel and gasoline on the domestic market. This has resulted in a 20% deficit in petroleum products on the domestic market and the idling of 37% of oil refining capacity, as well as fuel shortages in 57 regions of the Russian Federation and a ban on gasoline exports until the end of this year.
Because of the ban on gasoline exports until the end of the year.
The Federal Highway M12 Moscow-Kazan are rolling highway gas stations. Just one station every 150 kilometers. At each station, there are lines of cars stretching 1.5 to 2 kilometers, all waiting to refuel. I'll show you what this looks like now, and when we'll actually be able to refuel, no one knows. I counted 130 cars ahead of us.
But it's not just about the quantity, it's also about the quality. The range at which Russian oil refineries can be hit has almost doubled. If last year the farthest target was the Salavat refinery in Bashkortostan, about 1,300 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, on October 6, 2025, Ukrainian drones reached the Tyumen refinery more than 2,000 kilometers from Ukraine. According to calculations by journalists from the publication Vertka, the effectiveness of Ukrainian drone strikes is 85%. Out of 250 strikes since the start of the full-scale war, 213 have been successful. Many facilities, especially in southern Russia, have been attacked repeatedly. For example, the Ryazan, Volgograd and Ilsky refineries have each been attacked 10 times. In order
to somehow put this war into a stalemate, to shift it, we need to learn not only to repel enemy attacks on the front line, but also to suppress their logistics and their aviation. That's why it became necessary. And I'm not even mentioning the need to strike at Russia's military-industrial enterprises and energy system.
During the war, Ukraine first launched from scratch and then significantly ramped up the production of long-range and rocket-powered drones. Russian oil refineries are being terrorized by UAVs like Lyuchi, Polyanitsia, Peklo, and FP-1. Drones costing just a few $1,000s are causing damage to the Russian budget amounting to hundreds of millions of dollars.
Look at those guys. The 7th hit at this stage is catching fire. Yeah. That's the 7th drone coming in right now.
At the same time, following the drones, Ukraine is also ramping up mass production of long-range missiles. According to experts, if Ukraine uses cruise missiles like the Flamingo with a range of 3,000 kilometers and a 1,000-kilogram warhead, there will be nothing left of the Russian oil refineries.
If a strike hits an oil refinery, it will be impossible to restore that refinery. That is, it will be completely, if before it was possible, when a drone hits, you can replace the damaged parts with spares in a few weeks or a month. But in this case, everything will be destroyed down to the ground. The entire distillation column will be completely destroyed. And with just 2 pairs of such missiles, all that will remain of the refinery are memories.
The trend is that there will be more and more strikes in the future. And what about gasoline? And there is less and less gasoline and other fuel in Russia.
That's all for today, but very soon on Front News you'll see new unique reports from our journalists straight from the hottest spots of the war, brought to you so you know the truth. This was Vladimir Timoshenko with you. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones.